We'll celebrate.
That's right.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, I first want to welcome our guests because I believe that they're coming with a couple of things that I deem very important, and I want to take the time to thank them for that. First, time. Time to me is very precious. It is a commodity that many of us misuse, but when we understand the value of it, the purpose of time, and we know how to use it to assist us to become the best person that we are, it changes everything that we do. And I know the value of that. And I want to thank you, Joe, for coming and spending some of that expensive stuff with us. The other is your journey. That journey is housed with much pain, much sorrow, much victory, power, strength, knowledge, insight, all of it that was you, and you're here to share it with us so that we, the listener, can learn and become better human spirits while we occupy this beautiful little place called Earth, and so that we can become the better human spirits while we're here. Joe, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment, man. Thank you.
I appreciate it, Ken. And someone who's always on the other side of the microphone, I'm always honored when anyone invites me to be on their podcast or show, because for basically my entire adult life, I've been chasing after people to appear on any of the programs I've worked on. So I know the kind of time it takes to do these kind of things. So I appreciate you giving me the platform to talk about me, my book, the stuff I'm doing. So thank you very much, Ken.
It is a pleasure, man. I cannot wait to hear your story, Joe. Joe, I always tell people that we are creators, man. And I mentioned it a little to you and my audience know I've been saying this for 2 years. Creators create by way we process our thoughts. That is the seed that enter into the human being. And we then collectively, we take our thoughts, then we bring it into habits and all of those different things. But the process, we want to know all of that stuff about you, what you have created as a result of your journey. Tell us about the book. Tell us all of those different things, and by way, how they can reach you after this.
Great. Well, Ken, so my story is I've lived a very linear life, but it kind of happened quite accidental. So as a kid, I was a big fan of TV and movies. I was an 80s kid, so there was no internet. You know, everything you consume was either watching a television show or going to the movie theater or reading a magazine or newspaper. So I was just obsessed with pop culture, and I wanted to have a career in it somehow. And my heroes in those days were like David Letterman, who was a big talk show host in the United States of America for many, many years. He hosted 2 late night shows for many, many years, like 20-something years. This guy was on late night television. And for most people my age, all of my friends and people I knew, they idolized sports stars and movie stars. But to me, I idolized David Letterman because he was this guy who was doing a talk show where he was breaking all the rules. Like, he wasn't the staid, classy talk show host who would gush over celebrities. Like, he was open and honest. He really influenced my comedy in terms of his use of irony. I just loved ironic humor. And so that influenced me to sort of pursue that kind of career. But as a kid growing up in the suburbs of New Jersey, son of immigrant parents, my father was a ship mechanic from Spain. My mother was a Cuban refugee. I didn't have, like what some would say, a privileged life to be able to just get a job in show business. Like, we didn't have any contacts or know anyone like that. So one of the local colleges was known for having a communication program. So they had just built like this, at the time, state-of-the-art television and radio, basically building where they would teach classes and teach kids how to become broadcasters. So my first day on campus, I go down to the television studio and I'm like, hey, I want to be on TV. And they're like, oh, well, we don't let freshmen on TV. You have to work behind the scenes. I'm like, oh, okay. So I go down the hall and I go to the radio station. I go, hey, I want to be on the radio. And the guy goes, what time you want to go on? And just like that, I sort of fell into a career in radio because they just didn't care who went on. So I started, and at the time, Ken, I would say I was a fan of radio, but it wasn't like my number one medium. Like I said, television was kind of like my baby. But as I started working in radio, I was working on a college radio station, I had this epiphany, and I guess I had the wherewithal then. Looking back now, I was like, wow, that was a really smart decision that I made. So I said, you know what? I've been doing this for like over a year. I should see if I can get an internship at a real radio station in New York City, the number one media market in the world, and see if I enjoy this thing that I'm doing. And which is something like most young people don't do that I learned later on. Like they'll wait till like they'll get an internship in their junior or senior, third or fourth years in college. And I did it in my second year. So I applied to this radio station in Midtown Manhattan called WPLJ. Heritage radio station, was a rock station, became a pop station, was there for 40-something years. And the reason I took this internship, Ken, was I was this scared little white kid from New Jersey. And the idea of going into Midtown Manhattan by myself was incredibly intimidating. At the time, I was 19 years old. And so I was like, man, I don't know if I can go into the city and then take a subway. And I'm like, oh, my God. But the great thing about this radio station, Ken, was that it was located above Penn Station in Midtown Manhattan, which for folks for folks outside the New York metropolitan area, it's basically the major transit hub in the middle of New York City, where basically you can take a train from anywhere in the tri-state area and it will take you to this specific location. So again, as a scared little white kid, the idea of being able to take one train into Midtown Manhattan and take this internship was perfect for me. So ended up interning there. And within a few months, I sort of started impressing upon the leadership there, and they thought that I had a future in this business. And so after my internship wrapped up, they said, hey, listen, we have this opening in our promotion department, which is basically the people you see driving around radio station vans handing out T-shirts. We have this opening, but we need to fill it fast. But here's the thing. It's a full-time job. So you'd have to leave school to take this job. And at the time, I was like, man, I don't love school all that much, but I really love working at this radio station. So I ended up taking a job there, working in promotions, and then spent the next 24 years in that building, working my way up through the company, being part of the morning show, executive producing the morning show, and by the end, co-hosting the morning show. All because, Ken, I was this aforementioned scared white kid from New Jersey who out of convenience took this internship at WPLJ and spent the majority of my adult life there learning to be a better communicator, learning to be a professional broadcaster, and learning to be a grown-up. Because I was my first day on the job, I was 20 years old, and I spent the next 24 years there. So my formative years and the person I became was all because of my time I spent with the talented individuals and some all-time great broadcasters for the next 24 years.
Wow, that's impressive. Talk to me, take me back a little more before that, because I am also a parent of immigrants and so forth. So I want to delve in a little, because my brothers and sisters, we have this conversation about immigrants and when we come to the country and how we assimilate in. And I've done a lot of conversation with others that are also immigrants, and the assimilation piece, Joe, for some can be a difficult transition, if you will, getting into it, trying to fit in. How was it with your household, with such diverse backgrounds of your parents? How did that that household, how did you manage, how did you grow in that space as a young man? And I know that in there you mentioned that TV was a big part of your upbringing, but how did you manage yourself within that space?
Well, Ken, I don't need to tell you this, but many immigrants have this incredible work ethic gene that they'll do whatever it takes to succeed. And so that was ingrained in me from birth. So I think the idea that my parents, and this is sort of like the attitude I have even now working like this, a white collar job, producing podcasts. It's, and I always joke, I take a blue collar approach to a white collar job, that you just work your ass off and do whatever it takes to succeed and to provide. So the assimilation piece, Ken, my parents did whatever it took to provide for their two sons. So my dad worked as a ship mechanic, just worked his ass off. He would come home like just exhausted, come and just pass out on the couch. My mother would work office jobs and ended up getting like certifications so she could be like a customer service representative. And so to me, when it comes to that assimilation part of it, it just basically, for my family, it was like just do whatever it takes to succeed and provide. And if that means to speak English all the time, and that's really what happened in my family. My family was English was a second language for everyone in my family except for me and my brother. But my parents knew the importance of being able to speak English. And so by the time my brother and I were, prepubescent, teenagers, we were speaking English exclusively in the home. And so, and not that we were forgetting our roots, but it was the fact that my parents knew that for my brother and I to succeed, we needed to be able to communicate in English. My Spanish right now, Ken, I will say, is pretty terrible. So whenever I try to speak Spanish to someone, it's kind of embarrassing. My mother kind of really gives me crap for that. But I will say we didn't really forget that piece of where we came from, but it just was this attitude of this, just do whatever it takes. And so that's basically what we did. So if it took for us to having to communicate in English exclusively with people, that's what it took. And my parents were just like, at the end of the day, that's really all that matters.
Yeah, it is. In speaking to several people, that piece of coming in, and all of them, especially as you mentioned, they have this trait that it comes from birth of just pushing and pushing and pushing beyond pushing. And it is something valuable. My brother and I, we were talking about that. I was telling you, we had a conversation a few days ago, and we were talking about immigrants coming from different countries. We were actually talking about people walking through deserts and so forth. And it's a shame that we don't see the value within that, the determination, the stuff that makes someone ticks. A person like that will never be satisfied, quote unquote, being on the system and relying on the system. That type of tenacity has nothing in their mind. The system is not what they're there for. They're for something else. And how it's a shame we don't recognize the value of that. We were talking about that.
Oh, absolutely, Ken. It's so funny because, as the Western world has sort of had this bit of, and again, without getting too political here, this sort of anti-immigrant.
Yes.
It's sort of like,
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
It's there in the Western world. And the piece you're talking about, Ken, the fact that these people come from wherever they come from and they'll do whatever it takes to work their asses off and succeed. I think that's the missing part that people don't realize. It's these people that are coming to your Western civilization are going to do whatever it takes to provide for their family. Yes. They're going to work 10 times harder to the person that's already been there. It's just ingrained in their soul. So I wish people would understand that it's there's this anti-immigrant sentiment of they want to take our jobs. No, they're going to take the jobs that people don't want here. Yes. And they're going to take those jobs and they are going to do them to 110%. Yes. So again, without getting too political, I think that's an important piece that people miss out on when they talk about immigration in the Western world.
Yeah, I think they miss the key value of what that human being is capable of. Not many people, Joe, can even come through that journey to get here. We haven't heard those stories of those folks that didn't make it. But, here you are, this person gained this particular tenacity, and you can see it from the intro of your story, and that it gave us a certain boldness that I felt that some people don't have because of our background of being immigrants, where nothing is off limits in the sense that you can do anything you want. And because that's what my father, my mom had instilled in us. There is no limit when you came here. You can actually do anything. And because you can do anything, just do it. And so I find myself like you. I went and I did things that other people would ask me, how did you do that? Why didn't you think? No, I don't. I just moved through. So here you are, you're in college and you went in, you brought up, I love the fact that you had your feet in the door close by this dream that you was driven by to move through life. and you were able to come into that space. So talk to us being around these people, because I love the people with conversation and the arts and so forth. Their mind and their world is different, Joe. Talk to us about some of that world, because creativity is expressed easily, and it is expected. It is asked of you. Talk to us a little about that creative world, being there and having to learn the art of communication, body language, all of those things that you have to acquire as you are moving through in your growth and knowledge as an individual, a young man within that space.
Yeah, I mean, Ken, I will say that I've always been, especially when I was younger, I was always a sponge for information. I just loved learning things, and I will say learning things. I'll say things, learning things like what Rocky won Best Picture in 1976. I'm talking about like really goofy things, not talking about like the American Revolution. Although as I've gotten older, I've read more about history. But as a kid, I was a sponge for like entertainment and even sports knowledge. Yeah. And so the funny thing, what happened, Ken, when I first got hired at the radio station, I worked my way up. I was with the promotion department, then the morning show, which is sort of like the flagship show of most radio stations. It's the show that makes the most money. It's the most listened to. Yeah. It's 6 to 10 Eastern time in the morning. And I started with the show pre-social media internet. So this was like 1996, 97, where basically like if you tried to Google something, you couldn't because Google didn't exist. Yeah. So there was the internet, but there wasn't all this vast information readily available. And so when I started with the show, I would work in what they called the phone pit. So I would answer phone calls from people who wanted to speak to the host, and then I would write down what they wanted to say, and then I would tell the host who's on the phone. Yeah. But what happened was every time I was in the room, the host would be like, "Hey, who's that one guy from that one thing who in that new movie?" And I would know the answer. Yeah. And so more and more, I would be in the situation where they kept calling me into the room. And then all of a sudden, they're like, "You can't leave the room." So I went from being in this dingy little windowless, it was basically a closet with like a chair and a desk, to having to be in the room with these two hosts to answer any of their questions. And because of my sort of knowledge and breadth of information that I had, it was useful to them. So I always tell people, find something that you do that is useful for other people. I mean, that's the basic mindset of entrepreneurship, right? It's like, find that problem, fix that problem. So for me, the problem I fixed was, I was this guy who was super knowledgeable about certain things that were important to this radio show. Yeah. And so because of that, my role kept growing and growing with the show. And the great thing of being surrounded with these people, like one of the hosts, whose name is Scott Shannon, who American listeners may know, he's basically the father of top 40 radio in the 1980s in New York. And he created Z100, which still exists today, one of the biggest radio stations on the planet. He created that station. He was one host. The other host was Todd Pettengill, who for many years was a reporter and a host on the WWE. And so these guys were uber talented. And I, again, taking this sponge-like status that I always carry with me, I just started learning everything I could from these guys. And it wasn't like, "Hey, how did you do this?" It was just like being present, being aware, and listening to everything that was going down. And, even though these guys were all-time greats, they still made mistakes. And so to me, I was like, I took the good and I took the bad, and I was like, I like how they did this, but I don't like the way they did that. So all of this time, I was learning all of these skills from these folks. And one of the things, Ken, and I'm guilty as well as anyone, is like, I really took my years there for granted. I was well paid, well compensated. I was a mini celebrity, so to speak, in the New York metropolitan area. But I didn't realize how good I had it until I left, because I had accumulated so many what they're called now soft skills. I didn't even know that was a thing. Now, apparently, that's a thing people talk about, soft skills. But I'd accumulated so much that I didn't realize that I did until I left. Yeah. And then I started working with new people all from the jump, and I was like, "Oh, wait a minute. So all of that stuff I learned back then, people I'm working with now have no idea what any of that stuff is. So I was teaching them all the things that I learned. And that's sort of what led me to write the book, Ken, because it was like, oh, wait a minute. So this is just not normal. Like, to me, I was like, oh, okay. The stuff I was doing in radio was like, oh, okay. Being able to communicate, have an interview with someone, that's easy, right? Apparently not. Apparently people don't have these communication skills or this ability to prepare for an interview or prepare for any kind of life interaction. But I was doing it because for over 20 years, for 4 hours a day, I was working with some of the best and brightest talent the radio has ever given. And then that was sort of what was like an epiphany for me. After I left, I was like, wow, I actually, it wasn't just a job or something I loved. It was actually an educational experience that now I'm hoping to help other people with, because I took it for granted for many years, but these are all skills that we all can use and need.
Absolutely. You had mentioned something, Joe, and I want to circle back to that, because I tell people this is the key if they understand what we are talking about. And that's why I want to rest here a little. That state of awareness that you talk about, it doesn't matter where you are, in what degree, what industry, but the fact that you are in a state of awareness creates that sponge receptor, if you will, where you're able to suck those things in, even if you don't understand the fullness of it. But being in that state of awareness, Joe, makes you that sponge. Talk to us a little about that, to those that are listening, about the truly importance of this particular one thing, because I believe it is one of the pillars, if you will, of personal development, that one has to understand the importance of this and how it plays a part in them gaining knowledge, understanding, and insight in wherever they are. Talk to us a little about this space right there, because I think it's important.
Yeah. So Ken, the name of my book is Good Listen. And to me, I just liked it because it was a quick, pithy title. I like 2-word titles, but you could interchange listen for awareness. And the listen piece and awareness piece, I mean, they kind of go hand in hand. And what I talk about in the book and what I talk to clients about with is being present 100% when you are involved in a one-on-one interaction. Because the way you create magic in a conversation is when you are able to be 100% invested in listening to whatever that person is saying. And when I'm saying invested in it, I mean, while you're listening, you're also processing that information that will lead you to the next question. Because the best interviewers in the world, Ken, and you know this, they're not the smartest, they're not the funniest, they're the best listeners, because they're able to take these moments that happen and create magic moments. They're not. It's not just a moment that's happening. They're creating a magic moment because they're listening. They're so engaged that it doesn't matter what they thought they wanted to ask. What that person is giving them is then creating this moment. Like, oh, wait a minute. You said that one thing. I wasn't expecting you to say that, but let's go there. If you're not listening, those moments will go right past you. One of the things I coach people on is when you're going to do an interview, never use the word interview in your brain. Like for shorthand, it would be like, okay, I'm going to do this podcast interview. Don't think of it as an interview, because to me, an interview is question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. That's no fun. That a bot can do that nowadays. You want it to be a conversation. So yes, you may want to prepare questions, but one, never prepare them in numerical order. Never list your questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Never do that, because your brain, your mathematical side of your brain will think, oh, okay, I asked question 1. Now that they've answered question 1, let me ask question 2. But what your mathematical brain doesn't know is maybe the answer they gave you from question 1 ties in better with question number 7. So that's why if you take it away from this conversation we're having today, Ken, is when you're preparing questions for anything, and I'm not talking about folks who want to host a podcast. I'm talking about a job interview. When you're talking about giving someone some sort of, what do they do? These peer performance reviews. When you have any of these kind of situations, think about it in terms of a conversation where it's pieces of a puzzle that you're putting together, but you cannot put those pieces together before it happens.
Yes.
So that's why it's important to be prepared and be present. That's how you create magic moments.
I absolutely 100% agree. That's why I wanted to walk you back there, because I felt that they need to understand the importance of that. And some people, they don't understand the art of being present. They rush through things and miss the nuances that are passed within the conversation. I love that word. And my questions usually, I will have, like you said, I've never, ever in all my life numbered my question, because I understand the brain and how the brain works. As you said, first question, second question. But I put my questions down and I let the conversation give birth to those things. And it always happens. So here's this young man within this beautiful space, all this energy, knowledge, wisdom, these men, these pillars, if you will, because I know of them. I don't think you can be and live in New York and not know of them. So I know some of their work and listening to the radios and all that stuff. David Letterman is one of my favorite persons to listen to. And even now with his beard, I love it.
Yes.
And having the conversation. So here you are in the midst of all of this juicy stuff, man. And you became a sponge unknowingly, and then you began to progress as you left. And you're here with all the youngins, as you said, Joe. You're here with all the youngins, and you're seeing them try to navigate within that space. And here is the Yoda. Okay, Joe, here's Yoda begins to talk to these young bucks, and you began to recognize, wait a minute, something happened to me back there. When you had that revelation, and I know you mentioned it briefly, you said, oh, and you began to think of putting the books. When that happened, how and where were you, Joe? I want to bring you back, see if we could lock into that memory as to, it's usually a series of things. If you can remember some of those things that began to happen to you through a conversation that prompted you and alerted you that, wait a minute, I need to put this information that resides within me in a format by which I can then educate the youngins. Talk to me about some of those interactions.
Yeah. So it was funny. The company I work for now is called Forbes Books. And what we do is we produce podcasts and publish books for entrepreneurs and CEOs. So people who have been very successful in their world in many different industries, from real estate to housing to law to medicine. And these were all very successful people. And they are all like mostly type A personalities. And and it was funny, when I first got hired here, I was like, okay, this is going to be a very basic job for me. The skill set I have of being a radio producer, of preparing and producing and editing and all that stuff, that's cool. And then as I started working with these clients, it was like, oh, wait a minute. They don't know what a show open is. They don't know what show prep is. They don't know how to sort of like guide a conversation in a way that feels organic and authentic. And as I started doing that, I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to have to tell them how to do these things. And I started doing it, and it was funny. I remember one client was like, wow, when I signed up for this, I didn't know that you guys offered this. And I'm like, I don't know if we did, but this is how I work. I have to do this. Like I tell people, when I produce a podcast, even though my name is not on that podcast, I take full ownership of it. I have, it's again, this immigrant pride and work ethic of like, whatever I do has to be 100%. So as I was working with all of these clients and doing this and helping them become better, not only just podcasters, but better at communicating with other people, I started to speak to the powers that be here. And we're a publishing company. And I said, hey, and Ken, I don't know if you've ever interviewed a comedian before, but when comedians speak to each other, they always pitch jokes and they'll say, is this a thing? So, they'll be like, hey, what do you think? Is this a thing? And then a comedian will either be like, yeah, it's a thing or it's not a thing. So I went to the bosses here and I said, is this a thing? Is this like all of the stuff I learn in radio that I'm teaching these people in podcast? Is this a thing? And they're like, yeah, that's a thing. That could be very helpful. Because to me, I was like, so these clients that I work with, they spend a lot of money with our company, and I know most people can't afford that. So if I could put some of the knowledge that I have acquired in a book that people then could learn from, I think that's a win-win for everybody. And over the last year, we wrote the book and published it. And one of the things that I did with it, Ken, is so it's a lot of stories of me having celebrity interactions with people, but I didn't do it for like name dropping purposes. These were moments in my time that I learned from, good and bad, that can help people in no matter what they're doing. So whether it's a run-in with a Jennifer Aniston or Taylor Swift or Russell Crowe, these were all things that I learned from that I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to file that away and then use that. And so a lot of the stories I use in the book are stories that I would tell people when I was coaching and consulting them for the podcast. But it just turned out to be a great way to tell these stories of sort of like lessons, like little mini fables, except they're happening with like celebrities that people can latch onto. But like, oh, okay. It's not just me having a random conversation with someone. It's me having this conversation with this big celebrity, and this is what I learned from it. So that was important to me. And one of the things too, Ken, when I was writing the book was I didn't want to write this as a how to be a podcaster book because to me, the word expert is one of those words that give me the creeps. Like anyone can be an expert about anything. There's no school for being an expert. You watch television or you read something online. It'll be like blank expert. I'm like, what does that even mean? So to me, I was like, hey, listen, I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy who's done this for a long time. Here's what I learned, and I think it's what you can learn from it. So if you want to be a podcaster, the book is good for you as well because it will give you some of the tricks of the trade, as they say, but also and mainly it offers tips to become better at communicating with other people because, Ken, as you know, we've become really bad at communicating with each other, now with technology. And I love technology. I'm a big fan of sending a text to get a quick response about someone. But when it's a nuanced, important, something that's a weighty matter, that's where the conversation and communication piece has to happen with one-on-one communication with people. And so that's that's really the main thorough line of the book. Like these skill sets, sure, that could be good if you want to be a podcaster, but mainly it's skills and tricks and tips that I learned that will help you better at communicating with other human beings.
Yeah, we are losing the art of it, Joe, the art of communication. And I think one of the conversations that I've had with people, technology is excellent, but it is making the human less, if you will, dumb. Because I remember being in New York and walking to a payphone, and I had hundreds of numbers in my head that I would call numbers and stuff like that. I have problem remembering my own number right now, and so
absolutely, it's called digital amnesia. Yeah.
It is absolutely amazing what we have given up to, as far as how much we use our brains to technology so that we don't have to do any of those things. And it is really sad, especially when it comes to the conversation piece. I'll text, as you said, text to me is just for purposes of just updates. But when you're having any type of situation that the conversation, you can lose that nuance in there, the little breath, the space between the breath. All of that is information. That is a lot of when you ask a question and there's that space in between, something is going on. All of those things you miss within a text, and you will never get it and will never be afforded to you unless you have that face-to-face with that individual. So that book that you're talking
Ken,
about.
you use the key word there, what you just said, as I'm listening to you, the word nuance.
Yes.
Technology can do a lot of things. It cannot do nuance.
Yes.
You just go on Twitter and see someone make a statement that's clearly either ironic or a humorous statement, but because people can't read nuance on a tweet, half of the people will be like, oh my God, what do you mean by that? And the other people will be like, oh, that's funny. Whereas if that person said something in person,
Yeah.
that would not happen. So you can't do nuance in technology. It's unfortunate. I mean, maybe one day they will. Maybe Elon Musk is working on that right now because he has trouble with nuance, basically in person and on text. But maybe there's something we could do. But that's so important, and it's so hard to cut. And as much as emojis help, it's really, really hard to sort of capture the spirit of a message. And it's so funny too, because I feel like when you're speaking to someone, a lot of this stuff doesn't happen. I just bought like these chairs, and it was, I don't know if have you ever tried to buy bar stools lately, Ken?
Yeah.
They're like really hard to find. I know it's kind of a random thing. So I found this store that sells bar stools, and it was like they were being shipped from Canada for some reason. I don't know. And so I was texting the person. I was like, hey, just checking in to see about my bar stools.
Mm-hmm.
And she texts back and she goes, the bar stools are still on order. Just as I previously told you in the past, they will come in November, and I will let you know when they arrive. Now, reading that text, Ken, I was like, man, what a harsh response. Like, literally, like, I mean, it just came across as mean. Whereas in person, that probably wouldn't come across as sort of like dickish, for lack of a better word. But in text, I was like, wow, that's mean.
Yeah.
Like, as I told you before in the past, they will come in this. It's like, but I'm texting you now. Regardless of what past conversation, I'm just checking in now to see if you have and again, such a small microcosm of like what we're talking about in terms of like, maybe this person was saying it in almost like a humorous or sort of slightly ironic way, but it comes across as just this person being an a-hole.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things, that nuance that we will never be able to capture in technology.
Never, ever, because I believe that is a human thing. It is a human quality that is so sweet, because I was a single dad with four boys, and I watched them.
God bless you.
I watched them, Joe, because I brought them up about the importance of a conversation, facing someone, interacting with that great exchange of energy. You're not able to do it through technology. You just can't. And I see them when girls and people text them and they're angry, like, I cannot stand this person because they refuse to talk. And I'm sitting there looking at them. And they would end relationships based on that one thing, Joe. And I look at them and I'm not upset, or it's kind of something to watch, because when you do have that interaction, I don't care what it is, with whoever, the value of that conversation becomes something more than just text. There's a richness, Joe. There's an exchange of energy that cannot be felt within the words on a phone, but it can be felt when you and I are looking at each other. We are in the same energetic space. We are then able to have this rich and deeper conversation. She may have been having a rough day, but with you being in the present there, you would look at that and have an understanding of that type of response, where you wouldn't be offended or anything like that. And because you were not there, she sounds like it was a dick. And that's how it sounded. And it'll always sound like that through the technical exchange. So you had the opportunity to create this beautiful tool. And I think it is a beautiful tool, especially in our generation, the art. And I love the title, Good Listen. It is, that's rich stuff, man. So talk to me as to how did that come about, Joe? Out of all this conversation that you've had all through your life, you're writing this piece of artwork and teaching and giving your wisdom, and you title it Good Listen. I love the title. So talk to me a little about that, how you came about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, as we've been talking about the importance of listening, but the title of the book to me was, I wanted to come up with almost like a double meaning. Mm-hmm. So one is good listen. And so, when we talk about books, we're like, oh, that's a good read. Yeah. So to me, I was like, let's create a good listen. So that was the one piece of it. So whenever you're doing something, create something that's a good listen. It's a phrase that's really not even used. Like, I know I was actually, when it was funny, you know, when you come up with a creative idea, you Google, like, did anyone ever do this before? Because it sounds, because my thing is, when you create something that sounds like it's existed before, that's a good idea. It sounds something that, like, oh, that someone had to have done that before. And nothing had ever been written. And I found like a couple Reddit posts where people were like, hey, can we start saying a podcast is a good listen, like a book's a good read? Yeah. And so I was like, to me, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Like, create this good listen. But also I wanted to, the second part of it was like, good listen. Mm-hmm. Like take those two words. Like, to me, I'm a big proponent. Like, there's one law that I strive for, and I finish all my podcasts with it. And the law is the golden rule. Yeah. Treat others as you want to be treated. And so to me, it's like, if you can be good and listen to someone, you can become a better person. Mm-hmm. The problem we have these days, and technology plays a role in it, Ken, is that we are all siloed off into our own little tribes where we don't want to communicate with other people or even listen to what they have to say or know what they have to say. Yeah. And so to me, it's being a good person and listening is sort of the root of like my book and actually my being. It's like, being a good person to me is being present and listening to other people and what they have to say. Going back to my mother, when we were growing up, my mother said to me and my brother, was like, I don't care what you guys do for a living, as long as you're good people. Yeah. My whole life, that's what my mom always said to me. I don't care what you do. You could have the worst job in the world, whatever one may call that is, or the best, highest paying job. If you're not a good person, to her, she felt like she failed. Yeah. So that's going forward from my entire life, was like, just be a good person. Listen to other people. And that's a lot of the problems we're having today. We're so cut off from other people that are different from us that we see them as like alien beings. Yeah. I'm a card-carrying liberal from the New York City area, Ken. And as a liberal, it's almost part of our brand that we look down upon people that have crazy conspiracy theories. Yeah. So as a liberal, when you see someone who believes in QAnon conspiracy theories, we're supposed to automatically believe, oh, that person's a crazy person. So, Ken, over the last couple of years, I moved down to Charleston, South Carolina, which is basically like the joke, the little blue dot in a big red state. Very conservative state, Bible Belt, with a couple pockets of liberal folks like myself. And I was living in this apartment complex, and in the complex parking lot was this big, giant red truck that was like the noisiest, loudest thing in the world, and it had the QAnon acronym on its windshield, emblazoned, like not like subtle, like the big, huge QAnon. I think it's like where we go, they go, or something like that. It's like that acronym like splayed across the windshield. And again, me being this card-carrying liberal, look at this guy. This guy's nuts. It's crazy. Yeah. The complex, Ken, has a pool. Yeah. And so I'm sitting by the pool one day with my wife, and here comes the guy who drives that truck around. Yeah. Sits next to me, and we talk for the next 45 minutes about like the most innocent, trivial bullshit you could ever talk about with another person. Yeah. He was a good person. Yeah. Nice. We talked about barbecuing, our families, complaining about our wives. Yeah. But most people won't have that opportunity. Yeah. I walked away from being like, hey, that guy believes in that stuff. Cool. But you know what? He's a good dude. Yeah. But the problem is we don't do that anymore, Ken. We don't want to have that conversation with that person who has different beliefs than us because they're different. We're right. They're wrong. Yeah. If we have more conversations like that, where it's two people having a moment together that has nothing to do with their political or religious beliefs, that's how we connect to society. Yeah. Because we're not going to change anyone. Yeah. My thoughts and beliefs, I'm not going to make another person who's different from me believe that. So why bother? What's the point? Just get along. Be a good person. Listen. That's all. That's all we got to do. But we're not doing that because of the technology piece that allows us to be cordoned off from everyone else. I will only get my news from this one place because that's the news I want to hear.
Yeah.
Because that other channel that's doing this kind of news, they're crazy people who are backwards and they're racist or so-and-so and fill in the blank, whatever negative response. But because we do that, we just do not connect with other people. And that is a problem I hope to solve or be a part of the solution with writing this book and doing these interviews and talking to people. It's like, man, we just got to start talking to one another. Ken, we have come to a place where if you see the text come in that says, can we talk? Are those not the 3 scariest words in human language right now? Think about it, Ken.
Yeah.
30 years ago, if someone said, can we talk? You'd be like, okay, what do you want to talk about? Yeah. Now, when we see the phrase, can we talk? It's like, oh boy, what is this about? What do they want to talk about? What can't we just talk about via text or email? We have to get away from that, Ken. Yeah. When someone says, can we talk? Do them a favor and talk.
Yeah. I don't know how we are going to be able to manage that, because I do have, because of what I do, Joe, talking and interviewing all those people, this piece about technology and what it's done to us, it's made us tribal and brutal in many ways. As you talked about this conversation that you had with that gentleman, it's taken away that. And we get into these little areas and you see all these little tribes that are formed, and each one of the other tribes, there's no conversation. It's just hatred. I remember watching John Boehner when he did an interview, and someone said to him about compromise. And he said, compromise? He said, we don't talk with the enemy. And I looked at him and I said, wow, what are you doing in the government, as a part of government? Because the guys who designed that system was all about compromise. It was the art of conversation. Have you read these guys' speeches of what they how they spoke back in the day? And that's what I believe in the arena of the politicians. They've walked away from the original design. The original design was to have these teams, and for these teams to present their case. And you have these people in the middle there that are listening to each and everyone's case. And they then will decide based on this argument, this presentation of their cases. They will vote for who they want. And we don't do that stuff because...
Well, Ken, I think what we did here is we made politics sport.
Yes.
And the problem with that is...
somebody has to win.
Then somebody has to lose.
Yeah.
Nowadays, that compromise can't happen, Ken, because if that happens, that person will be seen as a pariah in their party. You'll see people like, again, I don't want to bash on Republicans, but you'll see Republicans vote outside of their party line, and then they'll be censured by their local Republican party because, like, wait a minute, you're not allowed to do that because that's not what we believe in.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this happens with Democrats and any other political affiliation. But the problem is now it's this win or loss thing where you cannot compromise because a compromise will be seen as a loss.
Yes.
And that to me is heartbreaking.
Yes, it is.
That's where we are now in politics. And we're not going to change that. But the thing is, that's fine. I mean, as long as you're not a politician or work in politics, that's fine. But it's okay. And you use the word tribe and tribal. And I think there's an important distinction there, Ken, because I think tribes are great. Mm-hmm. Find your tribe.
I love it.
Be part of a community.
Yeah.
Tribes are awesome, but don't be tribal.
Yes.
Don't be to the point where you want to just be with your tribe and not hang with and chill with other tribes. Yes. That's the wrong way to live. I'm all about tribes. Like, find that community that you connect with, that you have like beliefs. That's awesome. Find that tribe, please. But don't be tribal and be afraid to hang with other tribes and speak to them and see what they have to say, what their take on life is. So I think there's an important distinction there. The fact that we all need to be part of it. We all need to be part of a community. Yes. But we sometimes are afraid to leave. Like that little kid from New Jersey 25 years ago who was afraid to leave the suburbs of the Garden State to go into Midtown Manhattan, the scary big bag city. I'm a big fan of the sliding doors thing, the old Gwyneth Paltrow movie, like what would have happened if I never did that. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if my life, I can be confident say like my life would not be where it is today if I didn't make that decision to take that scary train ride into Midtown Manhattan. And so I think we all sometimes have to get out of our comfort zone and do things that maybe they don't feel so great at the beginning. But if we can do that and do it more often, that'll make us better people. That'll make us more well-rounded, because now all of a sudden we're not just hanging with our tribe and getting our information from our tribe. We're getting our information and feelings from other people. Yes. And I think that's just a better way to live for all of us.
I agree 100%. And that is when I use the word tribe and tribal, because tribe is necessary in order for growth. Mm-hmm. It is pivotal. It is where you get your support. It is where you get your camaraderie, if you will, your strength, all of those things. But when one becomes tribal, that's a different thing. But this conversation, guys, you've been listening to us talk about a couple of things, and I wanted to bring them back to your attention. Joe talked about being presence. And we stopped there. We talked about living in that space. We talked about taking risk. We talk about once you have discovered that gift that you dance in. And I tell people your gift, you'll know it because you will be working in there 90 hours a day and you won't even know that you're in it. People are going to look at you and say, what's wrong with you? Aren't you tired? And you are getting stronger. In the hours doesn't seem to be enough. When you get to that space, you found it. And because that is that thing that will move you and bring you through. And then when you get there, you bring it into a format where you can now become a servant. And here, Joe has put it. I love that title. I swear I wish I had that. A beautiful title. And how you explain it is perfect. In the art of listening and how we ought to behave with each other as human beings while we occupy this place called Earth, man. It's beautiful. And so I want to talk to you right now, Joe, as to how can they get to you and some of the things that are principles that you've put within the book. Just give them a little flavor. And we will, close it at there. And people, I want you guys to buy this book. The title, I'm jonesing on the title, man. I'm telling you, because I know what it is. I'm going to buy me a couple and give them to people. But I want you to purchase this book because I feel that when you are buying your book from the author and you're sitting down with this author after you've purchased this book, you're having a one-on-one conversation. We talk about a conversation. You're having this interaction with them. Trust me, those words within those pages are alive, and they have the capability of jumping off of those pages and landing within you and cause you to do things and change your life. And so when you are there with your one-on-one conversation, with your cup of coffee, tea, however you're doing it, and you are learning from him, I want you now to know how you can get to him if you have other things that you deem, I still need some more information. So talk to them as to how they can get to you and get into your space, as they say.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ken. I will say it's funny. So my wife was basically my proofreader on this, and and as I was writing it, I said she kept saying, "Oh, can I read the book? Can I read the book?" I'm like, "Oh, wait till I'm done." And so once I finished the first draft, she must have read it like 8 times. She was sick of the book by the time we were ready to publish it. But every time she read it, she's like, this sounds like you're speaking to me because I'm basically, I'm not as you can tell from this conversation, I'm not a PhD, highly educated. I'm coming to you from a person who knows how to communicate with other people. And so it's written in that way. So it's written in my voice. And so, yeah, so my wife now is completely sick of the book because she's read it so many times. I was like, hey, be careful what you wish for. You did ask several times, when can I read the book? I'm like, all right, well, you're going to read the book, and you're going to read the book a lot. So thank you for that. And the book is called Good Listen, like you mentioned. It's available basically wherever you buy books. There's softcover, there's an ebook, there's also an audiobook if you want me to read it to you.
Yeah.
You could find me online on Twitter is my main social media platform. Also Instagram at Joe Pardavila. Feel free to drop me a DM, shoot me a message whenever. I'm happy to help anyone I can. And Ken, one of the things that I've always been focused on, and that's gratitude. Like, I always want to make sure that I'm thankful for everything that I've got in life. I told you earlier that, for many years I took for granted what I was doing, working at this radio station in New York. And I remember every once in a while I would catch myself because my hours were, I would wake up every morning at 3:00 in the morning and I'd be in the office by 5:00 in Midtown Manhattan, do the show. And I remember there were many days, I would say 99% of the time, I'll be walking to work in the pitch black darkness. It was really, really dark. But New York, as you probably can tell if you've ever been there or seen it, it's pretty bright.
Yeah.
So I would walk from the parking garage and walk over to it was just basically across the street to the studios. And our studios were located, like I mentioned, in Penn Station. But for folks not familiar, the Penn Station is also attached to Madison Square Garden.
Yeah. So
I would look up and I'd be like, this is cool. I would just say, I'd be like, this is so cool. Yeah. Like, I get to work in the I mean, I'm not on the floor where the Knicks play or the Rangers or like Elton John plays, but like the idea that I'm like this, just like regular person, I'm no better than anybody else, but I have this opportunity that every day I get to walk into work, into the studio that's high above Madison Square Garden in probably one of the greatest cities of the world. And I was just like, this is cool. Like, gratitude is so important to me. Being thankful and grateful to everything we have. Some people have more than others, but we have to be thankful for what we have. So I want to show my gratitude and thank you, Ken, for having me on the podcast and being able to share my story. And I think that's one thing that people should probably take away from this, outside of like being a better listener, better communicator. If we're more grateful for what we have and not what we don't have, we will all be better human beings because then we will have appreciation. It's, it's like, it's the small things, people talk about, well, that's the small things that, man, the small things make a big part of life.
Yes.
The small things is, taking that walk with your dog, having that night with your wife, having, just sitting around, just like being yourself with other people that you love and are surrounded by. Man, if you're grateful for that, you're already your life's on second base. So
I think that's the key.
Be grateful.
I think it's the key, Joe. One of the most powerful principles within the human development process is the space when one becomes grateful for everything. At that space, I tell people, everything changed. What do I mean? The wind changed, the sound of the wind, the honking of a horn, the conversation with someone, the look at someone, the food tastes different because you are in a different space of just the busyness. In that space of gratefulness, life begins, I think. And I think if we don't do that, I remember I came out of corporate America, trained and with my suit running all over the place. And in my travels, I would pick up little rocks. I remember going to all these different ancient places and I'd pick up these little rocks. And I remember listening to someone and they said that they would carry like rocks in their hands or pockets so that they can remember when they touched to be grateful. And I remember putting rocks in my pocket from different locations that I was traveled in. I knew them because I would put all these rocks in my pocket, Joe. And through my day going crazy or whatever, and I feel this lump, I'd take it out and I'd be holding this in the midst of all the complaints and everything that I'm listening to. And I put myself in that state of gratefulness. And when I am there, the clarity becomes, things became more clear the conversation, the good listen became even more important. The things began and the answers were there because I placed myself in a state where I can hear, receive, be able to regurgitate what they would say to me. Oh man, that was like wisdom. And I'm sitting there going, because I placed myself in a state where I was able to. And the space of gracefulness and gratefulness and thankfulness is that space. And I'm glad that you came out to that because it is important. I don't care what you're going through, guys. I do not care what you're going through. I want you to stop and breathe and be grateful and thankful for it because you're alive. You're in a better state than many people on this planet. And so be grateful for it. Joe, I want to thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment, sir, and giving all of your insight, your wisdom, and making this space a beautiful space. And those that have been listening to us, the book is Good Listen. I want you to go and get copies of it. Give it to friends. Holiday seasons are coming up. Give it to them. Christmas, all of it. Give it for Thanksgiving. We're talking about that space of being thankful and grateful. So get his book and show him some love. Get in touch with him so that you can gain more insight as you need them. Joe, again, thank you for coming, man.
Thank you, Ken.
Pleasure.